Fabiola here from Germany, and you are watching Teacher Learning Cast with Piry Herrera and Benjamin Stewart.
Welcome to Teacher Learning Cast, episode number 13. Today is June 2nd, 2018. My name is Benjamin Stewart, calling from beautiful Aguascalientes, Mexico.
Morning, everybody. This is Piry Herrera, enjoying the heat wave here in town, and very glad that the plane in the cameras only take me from the waist above, so wearing shorts and sandals for you all today.
Absolutely. It's been a hot one, definitely.
Right.
Today, if you want to get in touch with us, we have a Facebook website if you want to reach out and post questions, and feel free to leave us comments. And you can reach me also at my webpage at benjaminlstewart.com.wordpress.com, and Pity's website is homers2000.wixsite.com/PDHA.
Yes, you can also reach us through the fan page Teacher Learning Cast Facebook and Google, Teacher Learning Cast Benjamin Stewart or Teacher Learning Cast Piry Herrera, and you can reach all of the ways to get in touch with us and talk a little bit, share about these experiences in learning and teaching that we've been trying to bring up as a starting point for reflection and analysis of different opinions. And glad that we already had guests here at the transmission. Last week, we were discussing with Adriana Macias Torres about the Teaching Aids exhibition she held last week also. And we also had students from the BA in ELT. We had our first guest, Ken Bauer, discussing flipped learning in different chapters, so you can look for us there. And we've been trying to discuss topics that we think are topics that are kind of interesting for everybody, but our idea is for you who are joining this transmission live or on demand, leave us comments and tell us what you want to discuss about us, if you want to join the transmission, if you want to put something on the table, if you agree or disagree with whatever we go through here. We can have an analysis, we can invite people, and we are open to this sharing. Right, man?
Absolutely. So really feel free to reach out to us. We've had some great talks. And again, if there's some topics that you want us to talk about, whether you want to be part of the conversation or not, feel free to leave us that advice, that feedback. It really does matter. We would greatly appreciate hearing from you. And especially today's topic, there's some things that I want to talk about with regard to competency-based education. I have some personal opinions. Pity's going to be talking about certain learning strategies, and we both, I'm sure, have very strong opinions about that. So again, feel free to join in and leave comments, even if you disagree with us. It's all good.
Yes, Ben. Something we've been doing very quickly in the last times is the announcements of different events that we have, and we've been having a lot of action in different places, and the more we can know from you, where you're from and where you're watching from, and we can also start looking for other places. But here in town, we had different events. We just had the Teaching Aids exhibition here at the Universidad Autónoma de Aguascalientes by the students of the BA in English Language Teaching, the fourth semester. And we also had the Teaching Aids exhibition from students from the French and Spanish language teaching at languages as foreign language. How do you structure all this thing? It's teaching French and Spanish as foreign languages. That's it. And I've been struggling with that all the time. And we try to cover the events. They also held their teaching exhibition. But we're also having some other events. Ben, you recently attended to UPTC. Can you tell us about that a bit?
Yeah, no, it was a great event. It was an event that they started up again. I think they had taken 4 years off, and so they had, prior to that, many years of having this conference and had the pleasure of attending and presenting in the past. I was invited this year, and it was a lovely event. It really was educational. It was great to see a lot of different students and in-service teachers, both in the event, and a lot of ex-students, now colleagues, a lot of teachers that I haven't seen in a long while. It was very nice to see those people and meet some new friends and colleagues. So it was great. In fact, I'm hoping that we can get a few of the organizers of that event in maybe next week to discuss the event and get their perspective. But it was really a great event, and I think those types of events are exactly what we need here locally. It's really about taking advantage of all the different learning opportunities that we have as English language teachers here in Aguascalientes, and really promoting those so that we all learn, kind of expanding our learning community outside the four walls of our own respective institutions. So it was a really great event, learned a lot, and hopefully it's something that they can continue in the future, and hopefully it's something that they can bring in some insights hopefully next week.
Yes, I was really glad to hear that event was packed up with people, and they didn't have more room for anybody else very early in the booking up for the event. When I tried to do it, I didn't have any space, and I tried to do it kind of early, but I'm glad that people in town and students and teachers from different universities are joining these kinds of events. We also had an event in the Escuela Normal Superior Federal de Aguascalientes, which was an exhibition from freshmen from the BA, showing up a little bit about different cultures and countries. And now that you mentioned about the former students from our BA here in the Autónoma and now colleagues, teachers in service and teachers that are already experienced teachers and teachers with different kind of preparations after our BA, different kind of studies and seminars and diplomas and all this. We also have an event from former students at UTR, Universidad Tecnológica El Retoño, which is going to be, I guess it's also a teaching aids exhibition event, which is going to be June 29th. We don't have time yet, but as soon as we get more information, we're going to share it with you. And I know there's also another event in Escuela Normal Federal Superior de Aguascalientes, but we haven't really gotten the details about it, but I guess it's going to be around the same day, if not the same day, around the same day. And I think we would like everybody to start sharing your events, whether big or small, any event in which you are willing to have an open door for anybody who wants to tag along.
Yeah, and also I would like to mention the Mestizo 45th International Convention as well. That's going to be October 25th through the 28th. It's going to be in Puerto Vallarta, Jalisco. And also NUPI, the 16th International Conference for English Teachers. And that's titled Internationalization and Digital Learning, Perspectives and Challenges in ELT. That's going to be in October 18th through the 21st in Hualtuco. So yeah, we've a lot of great events here, not only locally in Aguascalientes, but throughout Mexico. So again, let us know if you have a particular event, and if you want us to promote that, of course, let us know. If you want to come on and discuss it more specifically, that's great too. That's also an option. So it's really about promotion and again, trying to expand the learning opportunities here.
Okay, so I hope you guys have more things to share with us and share it soon, please. Today, what we're gonna do today, Ben, we have a couple of topics you already mentioned about competency-based education.
Absolutely. I want to start by saying first that the opinions, and we haven't really talked much about this, but I think it's something that both of us, Piry, agree on. But it's important to mention that all the opinions that we have are ours alone, right? So we're not representing any other institution or as far as our ideas go. These are all individual ideas. And some of the things that I want to talk about today with regard to competency-based education, perhaps others will disagree, and that's great. but it's important to state that everything that we say and mention and discuss in this show is our own ideas. And when I started looking up this idea of competency-based education, I've always kind of been on the fence, especially in the United States. There's a lot of talk about it, and it's very closely linked to standards-based education, which is kind of, it's related, but another topic for another day. But I wanted to start first by referencing this book and discussing first really the basic premise of a competency-based education, or CBE. This book talks about how students need to demonstrate mastery. Okay, so really one of the main ideas of CBE is this idea of students mastering proficiency levels. They say that it's sometimes called proficiency and competency. So there's a mix of words or terms that are used that mean similar things, that basically mean the same thing. So I think this also adds to possible confusion in really what is a competency-based education. This particular book talks about a more expanded version where students also advance on demonstrated mastery. Competencies include explicit, measurable, transferable learning objectives. They talk about the importance of assessment being meaningful and a positive learning experience for the students. They talk about the importance of differentiated education, so being able to differentiate and the support that students receive. And they also talk about learning outcomes, emphasizing competencies that include the application and creation of knowledge. Okay, so it's not just using the knowledge, but it's actually applying it in new situations and the creation of knowledge as being kind of an element, several elements of personalized competency-based education. Now, this particular book, they throw in this idea of personalized education, and really for today's discussion, I want to stay focused more on just competency-based, because again, personalized education is another topic that we can perhaps talk about on another day. But this book also talks about the Gates Foundation and how they add to this idea of competency-based education by looking at learner profiles, looking at how to define and implement personal learning paths, and also looking at flexible learning environments. So they throw in competency-based in with these other three elements: learning profiles, personal learning paths, and flexible learning environments. And you know, the context that we mainly limit our discussions on are really formal educational context. That is, situations where students are signing up for a course in an institution where there's typically a set time to complete a set of objectives. And so I think that the challenge of a competency-based education is trying to find, well, how do you base the learning experience on this idea of mastery and proficiency level? And if the idea is that students can progress to the next level when they're proficient, when they've reached mastery, regardless of time, there's some limitations, right, that I see in that respect. There's one last thing I want to share here, and this was a definition by the Foundation for Excellence in Education. And they define CBE as a system of instruction where students advance to higher levels of learning when they demonstrate mastery of concepts and skills, regardless of time, place, and pace.
Right.
So time, place, and pace. So for me, this has big implications here when we look at, well, what does this actually mean when we compare this to the traditional system where time is constant and learning is variable, to a CBE situation where learning is constant and time is variable. It's almost switching it around completely, this idea, you know, and I think in the truest sense of competency-based education, PD, it's like whenever a student reaches a certain mastery level, they should be able to go to the next level, and that should include another grade level or another course if we're talking about within a curriculum. And I think we can see automatically the challenges that we're going to face, especially as English language teachers. I'm thinking about, you know, the teaching of English, right? And what does this mean to implement a competency-based education when time, place, and pace really are turned on its head, so to speak, right? They're completely different, you know? So I don't know, Piry, in your case, what, I mean, how would you look at this? And especially from a teacher, an English teacher perspective, and maybe a teacher training perspective, like, it's one thing to teach the objectives of the class, but then it's another to say, okay, when I have a differentiated classroom or a mixed abilities classroom where some students are really far advanced, others are have a lower level, which is the normal, you know, which is the norm. Everyone, I think, can relate to having a mixed abilities classroom, but how do we actually implement this competency-based education within those types of contexts?
It's something kind of difficult to fit into the system, mainly because of what you just said about the classes are established at a certain time, and also in specific context, and we are trying to align courses vertical and horizontal, and we are trying to structure something in which, I don't know if it's fair to put it in that word, but I think we're trying to establish something in which there's always control. There's everything, it's on control according to lines, according to systems, according to electronic systems, according to policies. And that's kind of difficult to fit. And I understand what you mean by these differentiated instructions, which has been a discussion for long. But for example, here in teachers' information, it's difficult to carry on in the classes we had for students teaching practice, and mainly at the early stages. Understand that yes, we're going to have students come with a mastery of the minimum requiring according to the policies or the establishment of the course, and then you have to work with them about a different level from what it's stated in the program. And we have other students which have not faced teaching at any time in their lives, and they have to start from zero and get to a minimum standard required. And talking about the standards and talking about these kind of objectives, we are totally going against this time, place, and pace flexibility for them. So yeah, it's a hard thing to fit, and more than to fit into the system, if there's a way you can manage, I think the model of what I'll try to talk about later, if we have time, because I see what we are discussing here is going to take long. If you have certain models, you can do some try-ups, and you can try to make these adaptations to fit the education to special pace and needs of each student. But how the struggling in there is not to be carried away, and also you have to fulfill the requirements of the institution, of the syllabus you're following, the career, the objectives, and we have to manage this double play. I don't know if I make myself clear in that part, man.
Yeah. I mean, I look at it as from two perspectives. It's like I can see implementing it course to course, maybe at the school level. So if an institution is saying, okay, we're implementing this CBE or this proficiency-based type of education where students, if they show mastery of skills and knowledge in a certain area, then they can automatically go to another course, right? But another class or another level. This would be, again, at the institutional level. The other situation, or the other side of it, is probably more within our context and more realistic, is probably at the course level or at the group level, the teacher educator needs to figure out how to promote this mastery, but within the context and the confines, really, and the limitations of formal education. That is, you've got 16 weeks, for example, or you've got a certain set of curricular elements that you need to adhere to, and then work within the parameters of that situation. I think that there's a lot of things that people talk about with regard to CBE that I think are valid and important, like differentiated instruction, and I'm showing this article here where they're also talking about the terms that we even use to describe it. They say competency-based education, also known as proficiency-based, mastery-based, and performance-based. So, it depends on what word you're even using. For me, performance-based education kind of rings true because we've talked a lot about performance tasks, and then we talked about that at depth. And if that's the same thing as competency-based, okay, that has some meaning for me personally. But this idea of competency-based, where time, place, and pace really are thrown out the window, so to speak. I mean, in the sense that time, okay, whatever time it takes to be able to reach to the next level, okay, you can learn from wherever you want. Okay, that's great with mobile technologies, and that's I get that. And then the pace, everybody, in the true sense, every student would go with his or her own pace. So again, that's gonna be a problem when we're talking about formal education. I think it's one thing to be flexible in the pace within maybe a given course, perhaps. I mean, it's going to depend on the situation, where some students are going to achieve the objectives, the course objectives, before others. I think that's an important consideration that all teachers, both in-service and pre-service teachers, need to look at is, what happens when some students are going to achieve some goals before others. What are we going to do to keep them engaged and keep them and give them opportunities maybe to learn more and go above and beyond maybe the expectations of the course for those students, while providing support for those students who have yet to meet the course objectives. Right? So I think that question, that problem or challenge that we're going to have, I think is a real problem that we need to address. And if it's within the conversation of competency-based education, great, right? I mean, I think that's fine. But I think for me, that's the central issue: is how do we deal with the mixed abilities classroom and achieving those course goals?
Yes, Ben. I think you touched a very important thing in there, mentioning the so-called flexibility. Which is limited. It's totally limited, and it's just a variation in the. Yes, it's a slight degree of flexibility on what students can do, when can they do it, within a very short period of time, and not really. I mean, at the end, whatever happens, whether fast or slow, they have only the 16 weeks. When in this case, for example, or in other institutions, they have what they call quarters, and they have a shorter gap to achieve whatever it's expected from them to achieve. And so flexibility, it's extremely limited in that sense. And the other part of this would be the follow-up. If you really are flexible within the limits, and students are passing from one course to another, and there are things they have to still develop, certain aspects that are not mastered or in the total of their development. Different aspects come to my mind, like the sequence in from one course to another, the relationship from one type of course to another, and beyond that, the follow-up that one teacher can have from one teacher to another. Because right now, my guess would be, and this is just my view and my opinion without any kind of research or really deep thought about this, but my guess would be that the main decision from the teacher comes from the syllabus, not from whatever the students bring from the previous semester. And it's not the same, and we are taking it as the same because you already took that course or you already went through that syllabus. It's supposed that you can handle this, or I take for granted that you already know that, or things like those. I think I'm just grasping some kind of scratching some surface and examples, which may be really, really deep things to analyze.
Yeah, that's a good point. Because yeah, students may master something in one course, which will prepare them to do well in the next course. But then your question, you're addressing really an important issue of linking and actually scaffolding even what they learned in the prior course with and expanding on that to this course, and then the present course, and then finding out, how competencies are going to be kind of interlinked in those. But I see your point that, we could easily say, well, they master a certain skill or knowledge in one class, and then it being possibly ignored in another class later on, or at least opportunities aren't present to expand, help students expand that knowledge from one course to the next. So I'm sharing here with you because I wanted to kind of show a different perspective of competencies that I'm not sure how much of the pace, place, and pace issue or challenges that we just talked about fall into, because this is example. I know this is in Spanish. But the idea here that when I look at this, I'm starting to think more in terms of standards. Okay, and I personally don't have a problem with standards or listing out competencies in this way, in that it kind of addresses, it helps us kind of list certain things that we need to focus on. I think the challenge is going to be making sure that the competencies or the standards are not either too general nor too specific. They're not too abstract nor too concrete, depending on, the course for that particular, competency. I think that the trick is to find the key competencies that fall within that balance between not being too general, too specific, and then across the curriculum, being able to implement those competencies in some sort of, by recycling perhaps, right, in a way that at the curriculum level, the competencies are really represented, or the standards, right, are represented. That I don't have a problem with necessarily, right? It doesn't talk much about the idea of flexible learning or pace, right? It's just kind of, you need to stick to these types of competencies. And, I think that it really is an interesting way of looking at CPE. Really is, okay, from what side are we looking at? Because I feel that these are two different ways of looking at it that may or may not come together at the end of the day. I'm not sure. I mean, again, we have standards that we deal with, but there are not at the institutional level, to my knowledge, competencies that are listed out in this way. So I'm not speaking from experience in that regard. In that sense, we would really like to hear from anyone who's implementing competencies, especially in the English language learning classroom. Again, if you're on Facebook, leave us a comment about your experiences, and positive or negative, how things are working. Because I really would like to get some insight about teachers out in the field using this and seeing how they work with this idea of competencies, whether it's listed out as kind of a standard, or this idea of even more flexible learning environments where pace, place, and pace are really part of the learning experience. The last thing I want to say here with regard to standards is or competencies. Again, I'm kind of using both terms interchangeably now. the standards for foreign language learning, the 5 C's. Okay, this has been around for a long time. And I thought about the 5 C's here in terms of actually competencies, really, again, putting aside the idea of the flexible learning, which, again, I'm not saying that it's not important. Of course, we need to have this flexible learning. But if we're going to the level of students can progress and go to another type of activity at their own, at their own time, then yeah, there's going to be some limitations. But I think it's worth sharing that these standards, which again have been around for a long time, I think this is something useful that most of us can use in our English language learning classroom. That if we're just referencing these throughout a semester, for example, and we're trying to hit, if not most of these standards, I think we're on the right track. And I think in that sense, if we're going to call these competencies or standards, I think standards does have a place. Piry, I think you're muted.
Sorry about that. Yes, what I see is that we have kind of guidelines in there a little bit, but at the same time, talking about, again, the flexibility and the individuality for the competencies, but the guidelines have also to vary according to students themselves. And yes, it has to be, I think we've discussed this idea of a wider view from a different perspective and a different topic, but it pretty much goes to the same. A wider view of what students will do in the future with the language. So it means that the teacher has to have in mind also a wider view of the curriculum itself, whatever the students are going to study around. And I was catching up some of the articles you have the link for this topic. And yes, it mentions about the necessity for these models in competency to have different opportunities and different kind of models for students, so they can at least have a wider variety of guides from which they can start to look for their own path and get to develop all this competency they are required for. And finally, I mean, on all these small details, as general comments, but at the same time, I consider one of the cores. I catch in the readings two main aspects that they mention. One of the authors mentioned the competency-based pacing, and the second element being the competency-specific feedback. So we would go again to the idea of having this direct individual relationship and connection with the students, but at the same time, as the teachers or the tutors, we have to have all this background of our profession, all this background about the theories behind learning, teaching, whatever that may help the students, not only the theories, but the experience and the practical things that may help our students, just as a sample, and keep on learning and keep on developing things so we can bring this multiple models and multiple opportunities for students to take their own path. And I think this aspect of competency-specific feedback goes through the idea of the reflection at every moment during the development. So, and again, everything, since we're talking about individual paths, everything we can mention and everything we can read about, it's going to be also just a general guide that has to be readapted. This forces that you mentioned also, there are general aspects that can be a starting point, and they are broad topics, and precisely I think that's why, maybe that's why they're broad, because then students from there can take their own path, because again, if we have a framework, a specific single framework for it, then again, we are not really developing this idea of flexibility.
Yeah, I think in a future broadcast, I'm making a note to myself that to revisit this idea of learning path, because I think that I have a lot of opinions about that. I think that's something that is worth diving into a little bit deeply. And really the purpose of today's discussion was just kind of to open up this idea of competency-based and education, and again, expand on it in other broadcasts later on. But I think I'll conclude by basically saying that, you know, for me personally, a performance-based education is pretty much in line with most of the concepts here with this idea of competency-based, with the exception of maybe listing out the very, very specific kind of standards or competencies. But I think that it's worth considering and looking into and reflecting on, and especially in terms of your own practice. But moving on to the next segment, Piry, because I think your topic is really important and necessary, really looking at different learning styles and how those kind of cycle through. So can you kind of present and give us some ideas about that?
Right. Just a little bit before, I would like to invite everybody to join us through our different media and visit our personal web pages. You can reach us through different paths. The easiest way to do it is to Google it. If you Google Teacher Learning Cast Benjamin Stewart or Teacher Learning Cast Piry Herrera, you can reach all of the different media we have for you. We have the Facebook fan page, Teacher Learning Cast, if you look for us in Facebook. And for the guys that follow the live transmission, I know some people is even watching the video afterwards. Remember, this is a secondary transmission. It's a different environment and a different feeling maybe in the sound also from the original transmission. So click the link above if you want to have a better view, better sound, and indeed, I've been through the videos, and it's kind of a different feeling if you go through the original transmission, because then you can have Benjamin in first plane and our guests also in first plane and a better sound quality. So please keep on keeping in touch with us and send us your comment. Tell us what you want to hear about. Tell us your opinion about whatever you watch in the live transmission or in the previous episodes, the on-demand videos, right? So we are hoping that little by little you join, because I'm really glad for the people that joined the Facebook live transmission, and now take that second step and write something for us and see what you think about it. Yes, Ben, the topic I wanted to bring today, it's also something quite broad and general. It's a model that somehow I think different people here in Mexico goes over this model, and I dare to say that because it's a model that has a big influence and impact in the national program of education. It's one of the core aspects in theoretical background and methodology follow that started in all these educational changes that we've been having since, if I well recall, and please, if anybody knows, let me know if I'm right about this, but since 2006, they implemented changes in the language teaching programs at the national level, and they brought up precisely this idea of experiential learning theory by David Kolb's, and language teaching itself goes with the idea of having a student going through this path of the experiential learning. Beyond that, in my case, I also decided to have, this is something that we do here in teacher formation, and I also decided to somehow take it as part of the theoretical background that I manage with my students. And I don't actually manage it for language teaching. I use it when we talk about classroom observation, when we talk about teaching practicum, when we talk about going to real classes and have experiences in which they are developing their abilities, their knowledge, and their attitudes, their characters as teachers. And this is kind of a model, and I think somehow it matches also the idea of the competencies aspect. And let me see if I can get to one of the things that I'm having problems with my connection right here, and I cannot see.
You want me to pull it up?
Oh, it's already charging now. I got it. I'm gonna share my screen. Yeah, because it wasn't charging the page, but I have it in here. I don't know if you can look at my screen right there in the
I see it.
transmission. For people in Facebook, I know you can see this very well, but you can go to the original transmission, and there you can have the better view. Sorry, I just clicked wrong. Here it is. Pretty much this is the idea of experiential learning. It's a four-stage situation in which the students go through a concrete experience, whatever it is, whichever topic they're discussing, or in this case, language teaching is the experience with the language, doing something actually with the language and having the contact with the language. In the case of teacher formation, we would be discussing about the idea of actually, let's put a case in point, a classroom observation. The actual fact of going to a classroom, asking the teacher for permission to observe, getting to the classroom and collect the data. That would be the concrete experience idea. With the second stage would be the reflective observation, which is going backwards and reviewing whatever we can actually reflect on about that concrete experience, and start grasping the importance and the specifics of the experience we just had. Then through the third stage, which would be the abstract conceptualization, and which is the moment in which all this reflection and all this grasping about whatever happened and all this formula of what I saw, what I think, what I would do, what would have been a different path to follow, what I consider the best thing of it, what I consider the things that needs a little bit more of work, and think, and after all this thinking and all this reflection, having an abstract conceptualization of it. And it's again based on reflection, right? Rising, stating in concrete. I would say I would take it like the closing of the reflection in that sense, having some conclusions, having some ideas supported by whatever you experience at the moment of having the concrete experience, right? And analyze through the reflective observation, and capitalize, concluded in the abstract conceptualization, in order to get to the fourth stage, which is the active experimentation. The idea there that they actually consider whatever they conceptualize, consider the outcomes of that reflective observation after having the experience, and being ready to do it again, having again, daring to make the slight changes, or maybe there are not changes, maybe there are things that weren't done before, and starting to work with it. So if I'm trying to talk kind of general, because I would like it to fit to any of the areas you are teaching right now, or the viewers are teaching right now. But in fact, it's a four stages idea in which reflection, I would say, is the key word. Analysis, reflection, and in this case, putting in there the figure of the tutor, of the teacher, I would say feedback. Feedback, but not only from the tutor, also the feedback itself when the active experimentation comes, something that I think, Ben, you tend to talk a lot. What kind of feedback, when we talk about teaching practicum and some discussions we have had, I kind of heard your words when you say explicitly on underhidden, what kind of feedback is the teacher having from the students? What are they sensing? What are they perceiving at the moment of performances in order to make decisions? And if you see it that way, it's all this experience, but in seconds when you take in progress decision in the classrooms. But before going beyond, I don't know, Ben, if you have any appreciation or any comment about this idea of experiential stages?
Yeah, so this is interesting, and I keep thinking, and I put, go ahead and leave your slide up there if you would, where you are, just so we can look at this diagram. But I keep thinking about our conversations with our pre-service teachers that we had a couple of weeks ago. And yeah, talking about reflection and tutoring, the relationship really between you, the tutor, and the pre-service teachers with regard to reflection. And I've looked at this diagram, this experiential learning cycle many times and thought about it a lot. And I find that I know that this is kind of listed as a cycle, like one leads to another, but I think that it's more complex than this image represents. I think that it is so complex in this, that reflection, for example, reflection observation can be part of the concrete experience at the same time. If we want to look at, reflecting in action, we talked a little bit about this with the student teachers, that, how much did you realize at the moment that you were teaching the class, and kind of having the students have this reflection in action right in the moment of that experience, instead of just first the concrete experience and then later the reflective experience, which of course happens too, but I don't think that's the only way that it happens. And to take another example, the planning, looking at the active experimentation versus the reflective observation, when someone's planning on something that they have concluded from, let's say, the abstract conceptualization, they are going to reflect on what they reflected on. They're going to reflect on what they thought about at the time when they were thinking about the concrete experience, right? So it almost, all of these in different ways for me come together as a possible one experience, and not necessarily a cycle, a learning cycle. And that would be my first comment. And then the second comment I would say is this idea of styles. Like, I don't know if it's a style per se for a learner, like a learning style, because I don't really look at it as learning style. I look at it more as a function or just a reality of just different ways of thinking, right? So, the concrete experience for me would be more the procedural knowledge versus abstract conceptualization would be more
right, Ben.
Yeah.
I agree with you with what you're saying, in the sense of the interrelation amongst the stages, which are not really stages. And yeah, that's why my comment was like, every time you go through one stage, you can refer to any other of these stages at the same time. And as you mentioned, I agree. I totally agree in the fact that in every single one of these stages, you can retake another inside that stage in order to achieve, let's say, the abstract contextualization. You may go through any of the other or all of the other stages again, back and forth, in order to concrete the idea. And I think this is pretty much what Kolb's intended, because yeah, it's presented in the sense of a cycle, but and going further to the styles, and that this will also answer a little bit your concern about the styles thing. This is just the presentation of the idea of the experiential learning, right? But further on, he's got, I don't know if it's in this slide. Oh, you see, well, this is another diagram.
Yeah.
And there's, okay, you see, there's a little bit of the idea of the interrelation amongst the different stages, and a little bit more of the specifics about I think it's talking about the students' performance, or students, what would you say? Like, he's talking about the feeling, the thinking, the watching, the doing, and that's why pretty much I think the National Program of Education also took this idea of experiential learning. In fact, they are focusing their lesson plans for primary school on doing with the language, being with the language, and one more, which I can not recall right now, but it goes pretty much with this idea. Now,
yeah, I just think that, for example, having feeling on one side of the continuum and thinking on the other is just, for me, it's misleading, because I think people think, and I mean, not always. I'm saying, but I think it's possible. This diagram for me does not show the idea of mixing thinking with feeling. right? You're feeling something in the experience. And again, I don't know how much feeling is in the concrete experience, to be honest. I mean, I'm thinking of it's going to depend. Like, for example, if I'm a pre-service teacher, and I don't have a lot of experience, and I'm in the moment of teaching my first class with new students, I'm in a concrete experience, okay, by definition. But I am thinking like crazy because I don't know that much, and I'm trying to do my best. So I'm thinking a lot, and I don't know about the feeling, right? I mean, maybe I'm feeling nervous or feeling this or that or whatever, but
Right.
or maybe it's automatic. Maybe less of it's automatic, and more of it's, you know, I've got more notes. I'm thinking more, and then with experience, that same class, maybe I'm thinking less, or it's more intuitive, right? Or I don't know, there's other words, there's other ways. Yeah. And I'm just thinking about what this means to the practice, what implications this type of discussion has on how students reflect. Because I agree with you that, obviously reflection is very, very important in how we do it, and we need to teach and help reflect. But it's like, how do we reflect? Do we reflect in the moment, afterwards? Do we reflect privately or publicly? Right. And this idea doesn't reach that level of openness versus closeness of reflecting and the experience itself, that I think offers another level of learning, of development, of professional development, that again, I think this idea kind of has limitations in that sense. But I think all of these elements I would not disagree with, as far as, active experimentation. Of course, we want to experiment and we want to reflect, and we think abstractly and we think concretely, absolutely. But I think it's the how of it, the complexity, in that we don't lose sight of the complexity of all four of these elements.
Yes, and I agree in that sense that it tends to be more of a psychic aspect. And maybe talking about the idea of the way we handle the teaching practicum with the students at different levels. When I say that we actually go through the different stages, as you mentioned, and I think you made a good example when you talked about the thinking and the feeling in the concrete experience. And because yes, students themselves, when they go through their first encounter, they prepare as much as possible, and sometimes that overwhelms, as kind of happens in the first stages of performances. The first times they perform, they are overwhelmed by their thinking. Exactly, obviously creating a feeling, and yes, and maybe that's why I'm making myself the connection itself, and going a little bit further with the idea of and this is the next part, the idea of the learning styles. The idea is that he kind of makes this mixture of strengths, the idea of having a little bit of strengths over the different stages, let's say, the stages that he mentions in there. And in order to be able to go through the experiential learning idea. And he talks about this idea of accommodating, diverging, converging, and assimilating. And then he describes a little bit the idea from his study about the personality that the person with this style, which would be, in fact, he mentions later, like diverger, assimilator, converger, and accommodator. And there are different characteristics that he mentions. And if you see, he's using it in this graph, well, in this box, the idea of combining two different stages according to the type of the style of the person. Now that's the point where I got kind of looking at the description of the characteristics, looking at the individual personalities of students or pre-service teachers. where they are, and this goes back to what you mentioned, some of our students, they have certain characteristics in which they go more for being reflective and for being always analyzing the situation and trying to understand the situation from a mental point of view. And some others, they are more like practical. They just want to tag along and do it, and they start to making progress decisions. And I think when under this idea of according to their personality, it goes this back and forth between the different stages of the students. I don't know if I'm making my idea through about the experiential learning he mentions. Well, the idea of having the converger, the diverger, the assimilator, and the accommodator is that at the end, and this is my opinion, is that it's not about being converger or being diverger. It's just maybe because of inner aspects or the development you had so far, or your background, or your proper characteristics, your character, you tend to go towards being converger, diverger, assimilator, or accommodator. But at the end, I would say all of us have these characteristics. But yes, we support and we go toward the supports of our strength. For example, in my case, I consider myself kind of more practical in the sense I tend to go through the ideas of directly applying things as soon as possible, whether there's a complete plan or not, maybe. But the idea is to go through the practical and whatever works in immediate, more than deeper analysis or thought or research, which has its big disadvantages, right? And that doesn't mean I don't prepare myself, and that doesn't mean I don't plan. That just means I go and I tend to go towards that idea. And if we think about the stages again, I would say in every, if we put it in that way, that I have the experience, now I'm reflecting on it, now I'm having the concrete, and then I'm trying to apply it again. If you look at it that way, what happens is that at every single stage, I'm trying to do the application itself. It's not exclusive in that sense. I mean, in my experience.
Yeah. Again, I think you're explaining this very well, and I think that you know, my perspective is really from the basis of that I don't think learning styles exist. And if you go to YouTube, there's a really good couple of videos. If you just search learning styles don't exist, there'll be some interesting talks there. And basically my only premise here is that the learning styles, if those are going to be called converger, diverger, assimilator, and accommodator, that for me, those are just different ways of thinking. And every human being, depending on the situation, depending on the person, thinks will have some combination of those four. Now, some may be more inclined to think certain ways than others, but the point is this, that if we're going to link, I don't see a link from the learning styles, converger, diverger, and so on, to the experiential learning cycle. Because again, I think that in the complexity of the learning itself, because those, the relationships are so closely integrated, that really what we want is for our students to be able to think these four different ways, that they can converge sometimes, they can diverge, they can be assimilator, accommodator, depending on different educational environments. So it's not like I'm trying to identify each student as being one of these and then trying to apply instruction to that. That's what I disagree with. What I'm proposing is creating an environment where students can exercise. Maybe I'm not a very good converger as a student, but I need to learn how to converge. So some of these learning quote unquote styles, really it's just different ways of thinking. And depending on the task at hand, we may actually want to help some students work in this learning preference that they're not, maybe they're not very proficient with, and they need to learn to think a different way. and that's where the support comes in, and so on. So the terms, I like the terms that are being used in this theoretical framework, right? It's just, I think that the complexity and the approach of really using it and looking at it from a teacher trainer perspective, I think it's important that we look at the complexity of all of this, and we don't lose sight of that, and try to keep that in consideration, take that in consideration when looking at this, from maybe, like example, looking at learning styles as maybe one student is more of a diverger, and then saying, okay, that's it. I'm just going to resign to that idea and try to.
No, not like that. Yeah, and I think you're making my point of the example I was trying to give when I was mentioning that. Considering myself as more practical does not mean I'm not. I do not plan, or I do not research, or I do not prepare myself from a different angle, from a hypothetical. Preparing myself with a hypothesis of what may happen and all that. You see, and
right,
and
but
the way you put it. Yeah.
Right, but right, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but I want to take that and understand what you're saying and that what you mean, but don't you think that the diagram that you showed, where it had the learning styles in those 4 quadrants, and they were listing the learning styles to the experiential learning, don't you think that that's what's going on? I mean, for me, when I look at that last table where you have the quadrant, and they have I don't know, concrete experience was more appropriate for, I don't know, converger, diverger, something like that.
Yeah, let me put it back.
For me, that's misleading. Like, that's, I think, the main issue that I have, and that's different than what you just said. For me personally,
let me see if I get you right. You mean like the way we see it in here?
Yeah.
Like and kind of.
Yeah, this is what I'm saying. You're forcing.
The way we look at it is the way we actually take it. Like,
what's that?
That is the way we look at it. That is where that enclosed every aspect in their own box, being exclusive from the others. The way we see it, it's the way it's taken to actual life. You mean?
Yeah, for me, diverging, for example, diverging should encompass all 4. Right. Assimilating should be all 4, and not necessarily one more than other. It depends on the
right.
situation.
I totally agree.
That's the problem.
Maybe I didn't say it like that since the very beginning, because this is something I've been using for long. Even the cyclic thing, which I also agree with the idea that it's not exclusive and it's not as a cyclic as it looks in the diagram.
Like,
yeah, I totally agree with your idea. But and now that you mention it, yeah, it came to my mind. Yes, maybe that's exactly the way it's taken. We go step by step, and one thing excludes the other. Like, for example, in the box in here, like, yes, or you're an assimilator or accommodator. No, in fact, I don't say it like that. And I think I read a little bit that when Colb's mentioned that, yeah, it's not about you being one or being the other. So it's having a little bit more of tendency in your development. And this is my part. Because of any reason, I wouldn't attach that strength. I would take it as my strength side. But I wouldn't say it's because of one reason. I think because in each person would be a different reason, and that's why a while ago I was mentioning your background, your development, your background in your development, your inner abilities. You go through the idea of characters, the environment that you are in, the tutors that you've had, the idea of whoever is leading. And or whatever you think is that gives you that tendency. And yes, looking at it from the way you're putting it, yeah, I totally agree. It's not a matter of I cannot. I'm a converging person, a converger, and that's it. And I'm going to struggle with the other ones. And every time I face a different situation which is not suitable for me as a diverger, I'm going to face a struggle and problems. No. I don't see it like that. I just see it as a base and a starting aspect of landing a little bit, touching ground a little bit on a general model, as we were mentioning again, one of the models that can be followed and presented so that the students can have a path when they are kind of lost. And we go back again with the paths idea. And
Right,
yes,
right.
going beyond the path with the understanding that it's not that in this case, I wouldn't take it as a direct line to follow, right? But and different conceptualizations, which at some point students can go through, or you can set the situation so they can go through them and exactly develop whatever they can develop individually.
Right. Yeah. And again, I have no problem with the terminology. Some of the terminology. I think it's just the relationships between all of those that I just want us to be careful. And that's my main point, really,
Right.
is that we look at the complexity of it, and that it for me we don't look at it quite in as simple terms as that it is in a
Right. Yeah. I go with that. I agree with that. And now that you mentioned that. I never took it like the idea, but what you made me think now is that yes, it may be taken as a strict line to follow specifically in such, right? And it's like labeling students. It's like labeling students specifically and condemning students to be that way because there's a level for them. I totally agree on that.
Right, and looking back at that top chart, instead of maybe a circular arrow, that each arrow points to each other.
Right.
Bidirectionally. So each influences the other in more of a complex reality. You know.
Yes.
That would be a better visual representation, really, of the idea that.
And I would think also in the idea of macro and micro levels inside of each of them. And that's what I mentioned. Like as a whole, that's what, for example, in teaching workshop, and that's what pretty much a general view of what we do in. You plan a class, you teach a class. Afterwards, we immediately you start making a formal written reflection, which may start during the concrete experience, right? And then we start to discuss through a general reflection as a group and feedback, and the teacher starts making decision and prepares himself for the next class. And that's pretty much the general view in teaching workshop. But that said, the same cycle goes into the idea of I'm preparing myself for the class. And in the preparation of the class, they go through this, through the different aspects. They reflect on what they will do. They actually may experiment on, and maybe not physically, but in their minds actively experiment of what will happen if they decide certain structure or certain context for the structure. I mean, and that's what I mean with the micro and macro level. Right. And also during the reflection, we go back through the experiences. I mean, it's and that was my point at the beginning, that precisely you have the different stages, and you can have the view as a cycle, but yes, you can. We want students to get to make the quick decisions in the classroom, and the idea would be that they fastly. During the experience they are having, they receive some feedback from students and they have some elements to start reflecting in seconds and make decisions and take the action to experimentate.
And taking this one step further, we talk about micro and macro, but looking at reflection again, and I talked about this earlier. Sorry, can you go back to that slide?
Yes.
If we add one more component, the open versus closed element,
right,
we can take reflection to another level. I mean, you've already mentioned, and you're already doing this, where you're reflecting with your students individually, and also the students themselves in your group are reflecting amongst themselves. So imagine that's one level of being open, right? So one level would be actually it would be closed. It would be just you and the student, and then opening up to be a little bit more open with the group students and have them reflect with each other. Take that another level and open it up to the whole public, where potentially they could get feedback they could get kind of feedback from their own reflection or their own experience. So this whole idea of reflection and planning, or this experimenting and planning, it jumps to a whole nother level when you look at the possibilities that can occur with an open learning situation. I'm not saying that open is automatically better, but I'm saying that being open offers it takes this whole diagram to a whole nother level.
Well, yeah,
and, if you're gonna,
as an example, look at this. There are times in which they just finish the class, and sometimes there's no time for them to sit down and write and really reflect. And we tag along the group session, the reflective session, with comments from the tutor and classmates and observers and their own perceptions. So the reflective part in that sense, the open reflective part in that sense. But there are things that they already know, that they already have in their mind, and there's, I cannot tell you in which moment, if it was immediately when they did or they performed the action or whatever happened exactly, and after doing it or during doing it, they immediately knew that there was something there that needed to be changed or readapt or enhance or whatever. So when you come to the feedback, it's they have it in there. They don't even have the words to put it in words because they haven't processed the reflection yet. I don't know if that makes kind of an example of this, of overlap of precisely all of these stages in here. Ben, are you there?
Sorry, I had my mic muted. Yeah, definitely, absolutely. Like, being able to provide more of an open learning situation allows the reflecting to be more closely related to the experience itself. So, for example, one of the takeaways that I got from our conversations with our pre-service English language teachers a couple of weeks ago was that they told us that over time they started becoming better at reflecting in action, right? At the beginning, it was more, they relied more on reflection on action, which happens after the event. But as they got experience and got more comfortable and started learning more, they started being able to reflect more. Now, that transition, that learning process happened, that it happened in your case, right? It happened however it happened. But my point here is that if the students or learners are also receiving information from their experience from the very beginning,
yes,
I think that also that's going to influence how they go back and forth between reflecting in action and reflecting on action. I just think that it's just more input, right? It's more information that they get on their experience, so that they're not just learning. And this is nothing, of course, against you or one tutor, but I'm saying that the more input that they can get, the more that they can learn to say, okay, this helps me, this doesn't help me, this, and they can learn more, so that they don't start to, that they're open to the idea of sharing their learning experience with others. So when they get into the profession, they get into the field, that they have this mentality that it's okay to share, that they take constructive input from outside sources more willingly, and just have a better overall disposition of that way of learning. And that's my point here, is that we, it's one thing to reflect individually,
right?
And it's another thing to externalize that reflection onto someone else, and then get feedback from someone else, and then have it almost turn into a conversation where, the actual reflective process takes on a whole new level. That's my main point.
Yes, in fact, I kind of recall one of the techniques for reflecting in peer reflection. It's precisely that to have to bring up whatever you have to say, whether deep reflection or mere description or whatever you want to say, but have somebody to mirror exactly and give you back whatever that person is interpreting from what comes from your mouth. So you realize about what exactly you are saying, and that reinforces and enhances your reflection itself to notice exactly what comes from the other idea. Well, yes, I think we took more time now. Interesting discussion. I kind of sense something about the learning styles now, because I recall about the video we somewhere along we had a talk about the learning styles video. Remember that?
Yeah.
Out of the show. So it would be interesting maybe to bring it as a topic and to see and explore that. And yes, the idea in here again is to put on the table different perspectives and having all you viewers sharing also your comments, and we would love to hear what you think about this and what are your opinions. Ben, anything else to conclude? You want to add something to this?
No, just to echo what you're saying and let us know. We brought up a lot of topics, and like most of our conversations, we actually come up with more topics that we want to talk about in the future. But if you ever want for us to revisit a topic we've already talked about, if you want to come online and join us and be part of the conversation, or if there's another topic that you want us to discuss, let us know and just post it in Facebook. I think that would be the easiest way to do that. And we do want to know your perspective, some of the questions that we're posing, what you think about competency-based education, what you think about these learning styles and experiential learning, etc. Let us know. We want to thank everyone for watching the live broadcast and also the recording. And I think we'll go ahead and conclude. Piry, thanks a lot for this conversation as always. And I think we'll go ahead and sum it up.
Yes, thank you, Ben. I also enjoyed the talk. I kept a lot of information from the links. I think we can share. You're sharing the links in your webpage, right, for the different topics. Because there's a lot of information. It's a general view of the competencies-based teaching that we discussed earlier, and I kind of have different. In fact, I had a lot of aspects to cover from the readings, but I just wanted you to handle that part, and that's why I didn't get that much into it. But I would recommend you all to go through it because it grasps different angles to it, and we may revisit that maybe next week in that sense. We make a decision later on, and if you give us an idea of what you want to hear, that's better for us to make our decisions. Thank you very much for the talk. I enjoyed, and I'll see you next week, right?
Yes, we'll see everybody next week. Thanks for watching, and take care.
Yeah, keep on learning.